We wanted those textures and those kind of sounds of other instruments, but I think Morrissey was very keen for anything to be done by a band member, and obviously, most of the time it was Johnny, So there was basically an emulator there for string and kind of flute parts and things that were dotted throughout the album. I think there was also a piano sample we used. Although no, there might have been a piano. No, there was a piano in the studio, so we might have just recorded those notes on a real piano. For me at the time, I was really into using backwards reverb on things. So once the notes had been recorded, I would turn the tape over and put a very long reverb on the notes. So when you listen back to it the correct way, you get this kind of zing kind of note going up to where the notes have been played. And I also used to capture Morris's vocal into there's a lexicon. It's called a lexicon reverb unit that we used a lot in the studio at the time. And again, it had this infinite reverb kind of. So you just capture a note from the vocal into that, and you get kind of kind of held note. So basically, I would capture like 2 or 3 notes and record them to 3 different faders or so, and just kind of feel the way through the track and just bring them up at certain points. So you just got these different notes kind of moving around. So it's using Morrissey's voice, but in a kind of sampling way. But it's more just a kind of a reverbed note, and that I remember I used to kind of do that quite a lot of that on around that time. It's my favourite little trick. Well, with The Queen is Dead, I mean that was recorded in the main recording session that we did at Jacob's studio, and Johnny was quite keen to try something different. He wanted to kind of. We were using the studio more as a kind of play tool. What I mean, rather than just going in, micing them up, recording them, and putting out. There was experimentation with a little bit of sampling or whatever, and so on. And at the time when we did The Queen is Dead itself, there was a very basic little mono sampler called a window sampler, and I think it gave me about 1.5 minutes of sampling. Oh, sorry, 1.5 seconds of sampling time, or thereabouts anyway. And I said to Mike, "Can we just get a loop of the tom pad, the dum 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 dum?" And I basically got him to play it, and I found the beginning and the end of it in the sampler, and trimmed it and looped it. So we started getting a bit more structure to it. And then Johnny got the emulator in, and we did the weird kind of ding 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 ding, the little piano line with the backwards strings things, and we just had fun. We just built it up in the studio and just kind of picked and kind of cherry picked the bits we liked best and made sure they were there in the final mix when we put it down. Yeah, we were tracking, frankly, Mr. Shankly, and we were using one of the first kind of digital tape machines, multi-track tape machines in the studio, at Jacob's studio, and there was some strange little crackling noises appearing all over the place. And then one day we came in and there was a huge just fallout. There's this big gap in the middle of the song, just this across everything, drums, bass, guitars, everything was just gone. And I couldn't retrieve it anywhere. It was just that was it. So we had to go through the whole rigmarole of recording the song all over again. And basically, so that track got finished kind of pretty much last, I think, out of all the tracks. And Morrissey hadn't got around to doing his vocal before we left Jacob's studio, so it was kind of left in the can to be vocalised and then mixed at a later date. And for whatever reason, I think they did it with John just before the album was mastered. So that was why that one wasn't mixed in the main session, whereas everything else was mixed at Jacobs. On the original version, there was a trumpet kind of kind of going behind. It's kind of a little bit kind of Penny Lane type thing. Kind of going behind the vocal on the choruses and in kind of the little refrain after the chorus. But I think Morrissey was a bit uncomfortable about anyone being on the record that wasn't in the band. So it was taken out in the final mix, as it were. I was quite surprised how dark it was, really, initially. Um, so But it was great because it really gave the band a lot more space to kind of expand into and feel in a different way, you know, rather than just everything being full of jangly notes all the time. There was more space for things to hang and so on. So, you know, I think it was a refreshing change for them. You know, when we were tracking, we knew The Queen Is Dead was going to start off. You know, it was quite obvious that's the way it's going to kick off the album, and I think it was decided that Big Mouth was going to start side two, because you know in those days you did think A side and B side of an album. You know, not like now where you just have a list of tracks for the CD, and I somewhere along the line we knew that Some Girls Were Bigger Than Others was going to be a nice way to finish, a way it just kind of faded off. And so it was just a case of them playing around with different running orders and things. In those days, I think we might have just done it with a cassette and kept, you know, trying different things until it felt right. But for whatever reason, it was decided that No One, Never Had No One Ever was going to come after as the fourth track. And, you know, again, it's quite a lengthy, quite slow, moody track. And but it's got, you know, it's a great performance from everyone. And it does tee up Cemetery Gates quite well, because by the time you get to the end of that song, you've had two songs that are quite, you know, melodramatic and down, and then suddenly you get this beautiful, brisk, kind of folky, kind of great acoustic guitar playing and uplifting kind of drum rhythm, and again a fantastic lyric, and Cemetery Gates really did kind of like it. I guess it kind of gave everyone a bit of a breather and thought, oh, here we go, we're gonna have some fun now, and then it was kind of onto side two, you know. Yeah, when tracking with Johnny, that well, in general, actually throughout the record, I would always have a couple of different delay values for each, you know, each song, 3/16 or a quarter beat or something. And sometimes, you know, when a part was going down, you were just going to like try out this delay time and see if it would work on it, and it definitely worked. I remember on the flute line that we put down on There Is a Light, and also there's a little guitar figure that comes in the second verse. And it was great because once you knew you had that, I'd print that to tape, so that I always knew that was the sound for that particular part. And as I say, I was very proud of the way that turned out in the end. That track, I thought it was a cracking song. I think sometimes there's things in the bass line that he sings off of rather than just what's happening chordally. So it's quite important, I think, for all the Smiths songs to have a good bass line, because I think, as they did, because Andy was such a fine player, and you know, as I say, he, especially with this one, it was one of the songs I think they hadn't heard before we went in the studio, and as soon as his vocal went on that track, it was like we knew we were onto something special. And then Johnny understands what he's got to work with, because he knows, like, these are the gaps, this is where I need to now put something in myself and whatever. So you know, it was interesting because I say a lot of the earlier songs, I think they'd rehearsed them and toured them and they knew exactly what they were doing, but here the band were beginning to learn what they could do, kind of like with a blank sheet perhaps, and then building it up in the studio. Between the Meter's Murder and The Queen Is Dead, the band had become better players. I mean, because they were touring incredibly hard at the time, so they were, you know, improving all the time. Morrissey was improving definitely as a singer. I mean, you know, it's funny, you know, people would say, "Oh, he can't sing; he's always miserable." It's a load of nonsense. The guy's got a wonderful singing voice, and also, you know, it can be very witty and very, as we know by certain tracks on the album, like Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others. You know, you can have a bit of a laugh too. So, and also I was learning. You know, I had another year of engineering under my belt, so I was kind of fine tuning my side of things as well. So I think in all respects the team, as it were, had improved. So the next album, you know, the third album was, you know, a better album than the second one. And I think often with bands, I've got this kind of theory. I think third albums are very, very critical. And I think when a band gets to its third album, they normally have a good understanding of where they stand in pop culture or whatever. I think you've got to look at, like all Modcons by the Jam or London Calling by the Clash, Drums and Wires by XTC. They're all great third albums, and I think it's, The Queen is Dead is a great third album. It's Parklife by Blur, another one I've been involved in. Bands kind of get to the third album, they should know what they're all about, and they should better play to their strengths. And I think that's what the Smiths did. I think The Queen is Dead has aged pretty well. It's not personally my favourite though. I think we progressed and made an even better album with the next one, Strange Ways Here We Come. But I know that's not the general kind of opinion of a lot of the kind of the journalists and the media. But from a personal point of view, I think Strange Ways is a slightly better piece of work. As an album, I think it hangs together slightly better.